This segment is brought to you in part by the Canadian Historical Arms Society, owners of the Genesee Range, the premier recreational sport and training facility in Western Canada. See us online at historical-arms.com.
The Quiet Professional, a podcast about law enforcement, security, justice, and politics. We are digging deeper on the issues and going where the information takes us with access to experts and authorities. Welcome to The Quiet Professional. Hey everybody, welcome back. Nathan Romas with you. Today we are going to be talking about firearms and border security. For that, I have Chris Taylor on the show. He is from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms and Explosives, or the ATF. He is the ATF Attache at the United States Embassy in Ottawa, Ontario. A little background on Chris. Prior to the ATF, he worked with the Immigration and Naturalization Service. He's been a customs inspector and served in the U.S. Marine Corps Infantry. Chris has taught arson, explosives, and criminal investigations to police academies spanning several continents and supervised international covert undercover operations. He also has a Master of Science degree in Management and Leadership from the Police Executive Leadership Program at Johns Hopkins University. So welcome, Chris.
Thank you for having me, Nate.
Real quickly, I don't know if you know this, but when I was looking up Johns Hopkins University, because that's a funny name, so I just want to see what they're about. Do you know who some of the alumni are there? You're in good company.
I'm in very good company, that's for sure. It's I think it's like one of the Ivy League schools that would be Ivy League, but they don't spend enough money on their sports programs or something like that. So
Okay.
I don't know what criteria makes an Ivy League school, but it's like a Ivy League with an asterisk, kind of is what they call it.
Okay. Just for listeners, I'll give them a little bit of a couple names here. So Mike Bloomberg, former mayor of New York City, Woodrow Wilson, 28th U.S. president, and Wes Craven, American film director and screenwriter that I'm sure a lot of people know. And now Chris Taylor.
There we go.
But what are they going to put next to your name?
I'm sure that Wes Craven and Mike Bloomberg are bragging to their friends that they went to the same school as Chris Taylor. Yeah, I don't know what the comma, see Chris Taylor, what that is, ATF Attache, but it's, I'm only 52, so I got a lot more years to figure things out.
Yeah, exactly. You could be president all the way into your 80s, so you still got time.
Obviously, based on the last election, I think that was the oldest, people that were ever running against each other in U.S. history.
Yeah.
Because I think it was honestly the last time. I think Ronald Reagan was the oldest president at one point in time at 70, 72 or 74 years old.
Okay.
And I think that's when he took over as president in 1986. So, both candidates this year were older than that during the election cycle. So
yeah,
it's very interesting.
So, and just to start we'll just ask a question about you. So how did you get to be the attaché in Canada of all places? I'm guessing you had options around the world. So what brought you to Canada?
I think it was, I was tired in Philadelphia. I moved here from Philadelphia. I was what's called the Assistant Special Agent in Charge in the state of Pennsylvania. We had about 120 agents across the state. And I was just getting tired. You go to, church fires, bombings, mass shootings, large commercial fires. And it's just, it's tiring. So I did that for 4 years. And I was looking for a different job somewhere. My buddy that was in headquarters called me and said, "Hey, this attaché in Canada is opened up." And I was like, "Oh, really? That'd be cool. But isn't it cold up there?" I'd never been to Ontario before in my life.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, my former spouse, she's from British Columbia, Chilliwack, British Columbia. So I had spent time out west, and both of my kids are Canadian and American dual nationals. So I have ties to Canada, not to Eastern Canada though. So it sounded intriguing, and then I asked my former spouse if she'd be willing to go up there. She was like, "Yeah, let's give it a try." And I asked him, I said, "What do you like? What's the job entail?" "Just do you, Taylor." That's what they said. "Just do you." And I was like, "Okay."
So go out, liaise. That's your job, right? Liaising.
liaison, and like it's almost one of these things where ATF gives you a lot of freedom to kind of make the position, like create it, make it personalized almost. Like you could go, oh, okay, let me do this, let me do that.
Okay.
So we have a lot of leeway in my position.
So if ATF wants to run an investigation up here, are you the person that they would go to as the attaché, and they have to get approval, or do they got to run anything through you to come into Canada?
Yeah. There's always that coordination with. I have an office in Toronto, and I have another agent there. So there's 2 ATF agents in all of Canada.
Oh,
And what happens is when we have to do like investigative liaison work, they usually go through the Toronto office, and then they coordinate the meetings with like Edmonton Police or Calgary Police,
okay.
and basically keep the guys in, just say Texas, in touch with the guys from, or the police from the Canadian police jurisdiction.
Okay.
And it's like a go-between rather than directing any investigation, because we don't do that up here.
Yeah, they would have the legal authority, right? So it's more.
Yeah, like we don't have our guns up here. We don't carry our badges. We're not like law enforcement up here.
Mhm.
We're considered like diplomatic community,
Okay.
and basically coordinate the investigation for both sides of the border.
Okay. With the name ATF, I think most people recognize that. I'm also wondering, when are they going to add explosives to that? Why has that not changed?
Honestly, like it became ATF-E after 9/11, and then I think it was the Homeland Security Restructuring Act in 2003 that basically added explosives to our name, but never added it to the acronym, because it's like, I don't know if it's a cost thing, but ATF-E, they'd have to change every one of our shirts, our jackets, everything.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if it's a financial thing, but it's also, the 3-letter agencies are, FBI, DEA, ATF, CBP, HSI. Like, there's no like 4-letter. I don't know why it's stuck at 3 in the United States, but like RCMP, at least you guys got 4. But most agencies in Canada and the US are 3-letter agencies.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it was just to keep with the formatting, or if it was they didn't want to add the E.
Yeah, it's probably a simple thing for humans. We probably just can't recognize things longer than 3 letters. So
It could be something simple like that, because ATF is so recognized in the US, that I'm not sure if they want to change our agency name, because it would really,
it would throw things off.
yeah, maybe. Like I never really understood why, but it's an interesting question, though.
Well, okay, we'll get into the more serious of topics here. So we're talking about firearms and a lot of what's kind of crossing the border. So I'm happy to have you in here. You're the one in touch with a lot of these things and talking to a lot of these agencies right across the nation on both sides. So maybe we'll start with just talking about firearms specifically, and some of the numbers. If you kind of give us some of the numbers of what we're seeing coming into Canada. And can you tell us, does anything actually go south from Canada? Because I don't think we produce much here, at least not good quality firearms. Usually I see on the gun forums or different things that you kind of scour, lots of complaints about quality control. But in general, so what are we seeing coming up from the US, crime gun wise, total numbers? Can you run us through some of that?
Yeah, definitely. The southbound trafficking of firearms is pretty much non-existent. It's like we have obviously a surplus of firearms in the United States. So, to buy a gun in Canada and then to ship it to the US to try and make money, first of all, it's going to be more expensive to buy the gun in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
And then to get it in the US and make any profit on it would be very difficult. That wouldn't make economic sense for any bad guys to do that,
Yeah.
So the most of the flow of firearms is from south to north, or from the US to Mexico. We are an arms exporter. So,
Mm-hmm.
Even legal firearms, we're an exporter of firearms, when you look at the numbers across Canada, when I first got up here, we're tracing about 2,000, maybe 2,000, 2,200 guns a year on average. Between 1,000 and 2,000 was the 10-year average from 2009 to 2019.
Okay.
And it was just always assumed that that's the number. And that was a good number. And my brain couldn't wrap itself around assuming that was a good number without knowing what the total number was. Like
Yeah.
if it's 1,500 and you're only seizing 1,500 and you're tracing 1,500, you're doing a great job. But if you're seizing 15,000 and you're tracing 1,500, that's not so good.
So there's a difference here, or a distinction in how many we seize and then how many actually get traced. So when the numbers go out to media or the politicians say something,
Yeah.
it's like, well, what number are you using and in what context?
Yeah, because like you'll see, and we used to see this a lot. Like, so I'd say, well, all right, how many guns is that out of? And they'd say, well, we traced 2,000 guns. I'd say, well, yeah, but did you seize 20,000 and only trace 2,000? And that's what I started noticing, and that's why sometimes the numbers were a little off, because you had these agencies that would always trace, just say, Glocks.
Mm-hmm.
So now, if you take in 100 guns and 20 of them are Glocks, and you only trace the 20, then 100% of your guns came from the U.S. And it's like, yeah, but wait, what about the 80 other guns? They're like, oh, well, we didn't trace them because they're Canadian. It's like, well, you should trace everything, because if you don't know where the problem is or what the problem is or the source of the problem, then it's hard to address the problem, So, and it wasn't anything to protect, just say, the U.S. interests, or there was I had no idea what the outcome would be if we started tracing larger quantities of guns. But I knew that that's going to at least tell us more than 2,000. So, like in 2023, we were up to close to 13,000 firearms traced.
Wow.
Which is a significant increase from when I first got here. What that tells us was that it was like 44% of those guns in 2023 were smuggled, or just say they were born in the USA,
mm-hmm.
and then recovered in Canada. Obviously smuggled somehow, some way. They weren't brought in legally. So we classify them as smuggled.
Yeah.
The other 56% were Canadian sourced or European sourced. You guys import a lot of SKS variants, especially in the Midwest, like especially in Edmonton. You guys love your SKSs up there.
Yeah.
And I remember talking to EPS before COVID. And they said, like 2 pallets of SKSs were sold to Cabela's in like a couple of days before COVID, when people thought it was going to be like a zombie apocalypse or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. But they, so that's a bulk of your recovered firearms are SKS variants, that are imported directly from, like, the source countries for those are usually Brazil, China, Russia, and the Czech Republic.
Yeah.
So, and they're direct imported.
I was going to say that even for the handguns, like, yeah, I think that's a really good point that you bring up, is for people to ask further questions, right? Get some depth on this conversation. And okay, that's nice. This many guns are seized. 100% of the time, because I can't tell you a time I've seen different in the news. Like, nobody distinguishes where those guns originated from outside of the U.S. But it's like, well, Canada imports from, like you're saying, it could be China, Russia, Brazil, the Czechs, Austria, like all these other countries make firearms, and we do have ways of importing from there. So, yeah, that's actually a really good point that you bring up.
And when you, like, just say you're talking about firearms in Toronto, like, there aren't that many SKS recoveries in Toronto because it's hard to commit crimes with an STS in downtown Toronto. So they have a large proportion of the Glocks.
Mm-hmm.
So now you go outside Toronto, Thunder Bay, it's all long guns. So, if you draw a straight line from Toronto to Vancouver, you basically are recovering long guns most of the time, or long guns that are chopped up, like a short barrel rifle or sort of shotgun, or old Cooeys that you'll find in Manitoba and Saskatchewan and Alberta that you'll never find in Toronto.
Mm-hmm.
So, when you look at the entire geography of Canada, you'd say, all right, well, it's a 44% U.S. smuggled rate and a 56% domestic or other country source. The source is Canada, basically, but, through different places than the U.S. But if you narrow it down and look at Toronto, well, obviously Toronto is 90% U.S. because it's all Glocks. It's like handguns.
Yeah.
Because you can't rob. You're not taking an SKS to a store and robbing it. You know what I mean? It's hard to conceal that.
Yeah, exactly.
So it varies by province and it varies by geography, urban versus rural. But the overall picture is 44% to 56%.
One of the things I was wondering too is, especially for listeners, like what is the path of travel that you see a lot of these guns coming up into Canada through? So, and maybe we'll just stick with on land for now because I do have questions about, are they airdropping these things in? Are they bringing them over the water? But at the land borders or even between the crossings, like where are we seeing most of these things enter Canada? How are they getting across in general terms without kind of disclosing any secrets stuff, but
Yeah.
just what are we seeing out there?
I was just at that conference this week in Toronto, and we were talking about that. And CBSA generally seizes about 500 guns a year, to say, right?
Across Canada?
Yeah,
Okay.
across Canada at the port of entry. The CBSA doesn't cover the middle.
Yeah,
they cover the port, and then the next anything in between is generally RCMP, or the IBET. It's called the Integrated Border Enforcement Team.
Okay,
but then you got CBSA at the ports of entry. They seize generally about 500 guns a year. So now, out of the just say estimated 20,000 firearms that are recovered across Canada every year, 500 are seized by CBSA in these ports of entry. The other guns are coming through, Walpole Island, maybe Attache. There's different routes that they use that are kind of well known and well documented, but very difficult to enforce. And then there's the drones. And drones at times they secrete them in gas tanks of cars. They mail them up in FedEx packages. The hard part for us is, you see the firearm recovered in just say Edmonton, and then you trace it and it says, oh, it started in Dallas. It's like, all right. So now in the last 9 months from the time it was bought in Dallas to the time it wound up at a shooting in Edmonton, the cop in Edmonton is working on the shooting and the possession charge. Then we send it down south to the guys in Dallas, and ATF starts working on the purchaser down there. It's very difficult to trace that all the way back, like to do that whole line. Now, especially when you got, to say, several thousand tracings a year coming back to the United States, and only 2 ATF agents up here to help facilitate the trafficking cases, it becomes an impossibility because, like last year, we sent down probably based on the traces last year, and we could only do firearms that are recovered. Generally speaking, I mean there are exceptions to every rule. If a gun was seized or recovered in Canada within a year or less of its purchase date, those are the ones we send down for a quick referral. Like that automatically goes a year or less. A high priority one would be 45 days or less. So if it's bought, like we had one recovered up here 6 days after it was purchased, that's a high priority. We could send that down right away. But when this happens 200 times a year, like 200 of the total numbers of firearms, 200 met our criteria to be sent down to the U.S. to be worked. But that's each year, generally speaking. Like it used to be 30 a year, but that's when you trace 2,000 guns. Now, if you trace 13,000 guns, now you're up to 200 a year. It's like, holy cow, it's like a big difference, because there's so many more data points. So now there's so much more to work. And I'm not saying that means that many more guns are recovered. It just means we've improved our process of tracing across Canada to increase those numbers, So
yeah, I think it's worth mentioning kind of on both ends of the investigative spectrum, I'll call it, or something. But it's like at one end we have the limited resources and the time and the amount of people, and then at the other end we're getting flooded with these guns and different things. So when we talk about the investigations, we're better equipped and we are now tracing more. So we're adding to our own workload. And I don't think it's any secret. It's definitely well documented and out there. Like if we talk about drugs, well, cartels, they flood the border with drugs and they'll go, okay, we're going to send 10 trucks right now. One will get caught. The other 9 make it through. So we budget for that one. But that one will take up all the borders agents and all the paperwork and everything for like the next week or two. And how many go in behind that, right? Or while that's going on. So it becomes a capacity issue kind of on both ends. It's like we create our own capacity issue because we're getting better on things. So we're digging more and finding more.
Yeah.
And then on the criminal end, they know, hey, I'm just going to account for some losses here, but my profits are going to cover that. And
Yeah, flood the zone, basically. Flood the zone. Just,
yeah,
they used to do that when I was at customs at JFK. For every load we caught, we estimated we caught 1 out of 10, basically. There was a aircraft disaster in Colombia one time, back in the 90s when I was at customs, and it was, I think, a plane crash or some crash like that. The cartel took it down. I forget the exact story, but later you heard about on that flight, it was connecting to Bogota to come to the United States through JFK. On that flight, there were I think it was 12 or 15 internal carriers. When they recovered the bodies and stuff, there was internal carriers. It was 12 to 15 on that flight alone.
yeah,
This is the stuff you don't know normally. So when that Bogota Avianca flight comes in, it's JFK, and we catch 1 or 2 guys, and each time it takes between 3 and 5 of us to process this guy and to get him to the van and get him to the medical thing. All they do is they'll give you a couple of giveaways. They'll give you
yeah,
simple system because, like you just said, they flood the zone. Boom, they get 1 or 2 guys busted that they accounted for anyway. It's cost of doing business, and the other 12 make it through, and the profit they make on the other 12 pays for everything that they lost and then some.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't see that with the firearms. So the interesting thing about firearms is, in my 6 years up here, I've never seen a large container that was just filled with guns, or you'll get a person driving up with 50 guns in the trunk of the car and get busted,
Mm-hmm.
or 56 guns in the fuel tank, and because of intelligence gathering and everything else, we targeted that person and we find the 56 gun. Now, in theory, that's that person doing it individually. When you look at these networks like the Sinaloa cartel and stuff, and how they bring up mass quantities of drugs,
Mm-hmm.
they bring it in from China into Canada, then bring it down, or bring it China into Mexico, and then bring it north. You don't see those major loads. When I was in customs, sometimes we'd get 2,000 pound seizure of marijuana from Jamaica. It would be in a whole cargo container on a plane.
Mm.
I've never seen that or heard of it. The biggest load I've heard about so far up here was a couple of years ago in Quebec. And it sounds like the most Canadian crime ever, but the guy was dragging a sled through the snow attached to a rope. And believe it or not, it's a hockey bag of all things with 249 lower receivers of Glocks in it, dragging them through. And he popped a Border Patrol sensor or something like that. So they called the Mounties, and the Mounties came in and grabbed the guy.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, open and shut case. But that was 250. And this guy was doing this obviously on his own. He's, that's not the way the cartel, I think, would bring it through normally. But it's so much connection between the U.S. and Canada that there's so many individuals that are able to, if I buy 1 gun in Georgia for $500, $600, and I get it to my friend in Toronto that I met down in Florida while he was down there and, being a snowbird or something, that 1 gun gets me $5,000, $6,000 in Toronto,
Yeah.
You don't, and for normal people in the U.S. or Canada, you come down to Florida to visit me, and I'm down there, we're hanging out at the pool. I could get a gun. You could sell it up there. Hey, ship me an Xbox, put it in an Xbox. I'll give you $3,000 for it. It becomes a very easy thing to be able to do if you're just otherwise not criminal, but you want to make extra money. So if you want to do that with Coke, the normal person can't get a kilo of Coke and ship it to you. They would have no access to that. It's
although people do try the mail, it's surprising how many people do just throw things into the regular mail and try and ship
right
it.
into the mail. But even just say a normal guy sitting at the pool in beach in Miami doesn't have access to a kilo. They wouldn't even know where to get one.
Yeah.
You could buy a gun at the pawn shop down there. So it's it becomes an easier individual crime than the organizational efforts it takes to move mass quantities of a perishable product like cocaine from Colombia or Mexico into the U.S. or fentanyl from Canada to the U.S. or something like that. Moving the guns out is much easier, because like I said, I can buy 1 gun, put it in a FedEx box, and just the sheer numbers of FedEx parcels and everything else, customs may or may not find it, just say.
Yeah.
And then it gets to Toronto and you sell it for $5,000.
That's, kind of speaks to one of the things I've mentioned on here a bunch of times, and I've asked more on with the DEA guests that I've had, but it's like, well, is chasing commodities specifically worth the time? Because at the end of the day, it's really the person that is the problem.
Yeah.
And it's like, so, the investigation kind of starts with the firearm, but at the end of the day, it's like we have all these, we'll call them lone wolves, the individuals who are doing things for money, or whatever their purpose may be. But, we got to find a way to deal with the individuals. And unfortunately, on the Canadian side, you don't see too harsh a sentencing. So there's not a lot of discouragement, I'll say, from this side.
The guy in Quebec got like 6 months.
Yeah.
He potential profit of $2.5 million. This is what I said at the conference the other day. Like his profit would have been, just say low end, $2 million.
Yeah.
If he didn't get busted. So then he gets like 6 months. I think it was a year in jail, but then it wound up getting reduced to 6 months. Then I think he said sorry, so they made it like 3 months. And then he gets deported back to New York, right?
Yeah.
So now imagine this guy goes back to Brooklyn or Queens and he goes, I just did 3 months in minimum security and my potential gain was $2.5 million. Like, and just see the worst outcome was 3 months in a minimum security prison, right?
Yeah.
This ain't like in the movies, the Canadian prisons aren't like Lompoc or somewhere, or Florence, Colorado, where it's like these U.S. penitentiaries. Like your prisons aren't that bad. So now this guy does 3 months in jail, gets deported, goes back. I guarantee he's probably telling his friends, "Hey, bro, I almost made $2 million.
Mm-hmm.
And the worst outcome was 3 months in jail." Any of his friends would say, "Okay, let me try next week. It's one of those things where you wonder, like, without that discouragement, like you were talking about,
mm-hmm.
Anybody would want to do that. It's like, it becomes so easy because the risk reward, it's so imbalanced. It's like, all right, well, let me give that a try.
Yeah.
So I think that's why you have the individuals rather than these massive cartels, because the normal individuals, like, all right, well, maybe I'll give that a try, make a couple of grand. And then that's all they need is that one to succeed. And then it becomes 5, then it's 10. Then it's like, then they keep buying it. And then all of a sudden we recover one gun. And this guy, we find out, bought 50 guns in the last year, and it's like, oh God, where are the other 49? They just haven't turned up yet.
Well, and you know what, when you're talking about the total seizure numbers going, that also kind of makes me think like, well, you still see crime increasing and we're saying there's more organized crime in Canada. Like we're growing here. Those numbers are out there as well.
Yeah.
So it's like, if that keeps going up, but we're seizing more, how much more are we missing? Because that number must also be growing.
Well, and that's the key with the stats that I'm telling you about. Like, just say it was 2,000 guns that were being traced in 2019, and it was 13,000 guns in 2023, right?
Mm-hmm.
I would never suggest that means we're recovering more guns. There's just say a normal amount of guns that Canadians recover across the country. In my brain, based on estimates that I've seen, it's probably close to 30,000, 35,000 firearms that are recovered across Canada every year. The number was a bit shocking, but it's truly close to that number. It's about, so just in the most recent Canadian Firearms Program report, it's a Commissioner's report on firearms. Generally, they would list the number of firearms seized across Canada each year, just seized, not traced.
Okay.
So that seizure number was always between 25 and 35,000 in their reporting. Because what happens is when a law enforcement agency in Canada, it's the Public Agents Firearms Act, and they're required to record firearms taken in by a police agency. The cops know the system is PWS,
mm-hmm.
Public Agents Website, or PAIN, Public Agency Identification Network. So every firearm that EPS has a PAIN number or PWS number. And any gun you take into custody also has to generate a PAIN number because the government wants to see basically how many firearms that your agency is responsible for.
Okay.
So what they do is, so now, of course, the system is kind of broken into two, ones that are possessed by the agency and ones that are seized by the agency. So if you look at the seized column, that's generally between 30 and 35,000, or taken into custody, just say, by that agency in that year. So now across Canada, the number is about 35,000. The interesting part about that is Canadians take into custody they're called protective custody, and there's also criminal investigation. So within that one category of 35,000, just say protective custody make up generally between 40 and 60% of the firearms taken into custody. So those guns are not even like that important because it's grandpa passed away. He had a pal. He had 20 guns. And then you got to go and grandma doesn't have a pal. And then you have to go take those guns and bring them into police custody until somebody's legally allowed to possess them. Those are not the guns we're worried about. Those are, those are normal protective custody weapons. Or just say there's a domestic violence thing and the cops seized the firearm and it wasn't related to the domestic violence.
And if I could add in there too, they don't tell you in the news how many are given back. So these numbers add into the seizures. But if it's like, well, the person's not guilty of something, or we were holding on to them for a whole variety of reasons, but they go back. Well, they still count on the seizure column, but not in the hey, we're going to return these to this person column. And, we're not subtracting it out of the seizures. So we're still inflating numbers on one side, but not giving the truth on the other.
Yeah. And that's where the difference where when we out there teaching these Canadian police agencies, it's like, we don't want you to trace non-crime guns. Like our tracing system is set up for crime guns. It's not set up for protected custody weapons. So in general, just say the 35,000 or 40,000 number would be accurate as the total number of firearms recovered in Canada. Out of that number, it's probably closer to 15 to 20,000, which would be crime guns of that total. So that's when I'm out teaching and talking about tracing. Generally speaking, if Canada were to hit that 15 to 20,000 mark one year, then I would feel relatively certain that we're generally, in a general way, that we're tracing most of the crime guns at that point. Even this year, we're getting close. In 2023, the 2024 numbers haven't come out, but we were at 13,000. So now, if our total number in Canada would be 15 to 20, we're getting really close to that number. And they're doing an amazing job across all these provinces, making tracing a priority. Because without tracing, you're never going to find out where the source is,
Yeah.
Like when I first got up here, I was talking to Stewie, at EPS. And I was like, bro, if you don't trace, like that gun in December that was recovered and on the pegboard, that Glock, well, you arrest the guy, you charge him with possession, he goes to jail. That thing gets destroyed, trial, it gets destroyed. The person that sent that Glock has, just say he was sending one a week. And because it's never been traced, you never know that Nate down in Florida is shipping one gun a week to Edmonton.
Yeah.
One gun every week. But the guns are being recovered across Alberta, just saying they're on pegboards throughout the province. But if no one traces it, there's no way for us to know that Nate down in Florida is sending 50 guns a year up to Canada, So that's why tracing is so vital.
So at the very source part of it, is there a specific state or place, region, like that we see most of these things coming from? Is there one particular area that's worse than others?
Yeah, basically you see Florida, Texas, Ohio, Georgia.
Oh, really? Okay.
Are the main source states.
Is there a reason?
I mean, we can only speculate, but one of the things is there's a lot of Canadians that go down to these places, like especially Florida and Texas.
Yeah.
And they form relationships, It's like, you're a bad guy in Canada and you go take a vacation down in Florida. You're not vacationing in Montana. So, it's a little too similar to Saskatchewan or to Alberta in Montana. So you're going down to Texas or Florida or Phoenix, Arizona, and then you're making network connections down in those areas. This is what we assume, but that's a large amount of the firearms that are recovered in Canada come from these 4 or 5 states.
Are they largely straw purchase type deal there? So is it easier then to get firearms in those states as opposed to other states?
Oh, yeah. And it's like less restrictions in certain states. You obviously know Texas, where it's like, you can walk around with a gun on your hip. It's very kind of, they're not really as strict as just say New York or New Jersey, where they want you to prove all this stuff, take your class. And, they have more restrictions in certain states and less in other states. And that's up to the states to decide,
Yeah.
But it obviously has a factor, because it's not like if you buy a gun in New York, there's a lot of restrictions on that as opposed to Texas or Florida. So, you would assume, all right, Ontario or Quebec would recover a lot of New York guns, but that's not the case. Still the same: Florida, Texas, Ohio, Georgia.
Okay.
Not Maine or New York State, because it's just hard to get guns in those states, as opposed to Florida and Texas and just say Montana.
So at the when we're talking about like the border crossings and how these guns actually get into Canada, obviously people can drive them over. Are we seeing it in any different ways? So, and this I actually have no knowledge of, but like we have all the Great Lakes. We could have from state of Washington, and someone just does a little loop over to Vancouver, or I don't know, drop it out in the middle of the ocean. We see this with drugs.
Yeah,
They'll drop something out in the ocean, and another boat comes by from somewhere else and picks it up. Like, do all these methods exist for firearms as well?
I would say that if you looked at either the unmanned border crossings, and like upstate New York, I got in a helicopter one time in Vermont, flew along the border, and there's like parts of the border where it's just rocks, like literal rocks, like 3-foot boulders basically blocking a path.
Yeah, so you can't drive, but you could walk. Yeah.
Or you could, you could walk, you could probably drive. I mean, sometimes they do what's called like a force through. They just kind of gun it, cross into the U.S. in a field, and then just get out of the vehicle and run. By the time the Border Patrol's notified, it's like they get there and there's an empty car stuck in the mud or stuck on a boulder.
Yeah.
And all the occupants are fled already, and it's like there's no fence, there's no anything. It's just rocks. Like there's one part where it's a library that's half in the US and half in Canada.
Yeah.
Literally, it's the front and back door. Like each entrance is in a different country. So they had cases where the guys would go in there and drop something in the garbage pail, just say wrapped up in a shopping bag. And then their friend comes in the Canadian side, grabs the shopping bag out of the garbage pail, and walks out. It's the largest undefended border in the world. I think it's like 8,500 kilometers long. It's just like there's no troops, there's no nothing. Like certain areas, like I said, all you have is rocks.
Yeah.
That's the border. Or like a sign. Like there are unmanned border crossings where when the gate is down, you could wait for the customs guy, or just most people just go around. It's like, okay.
Well, and I think that's what a lot of people kind of get upset about with all the narratives right now. But it's like, they really like this idea. It's the undefended border and we're so friendly. But it's like, well, but people take advantage of that. So you do still have to have some sort of security there. And it's not saying we have to set up a demilitarized zone. This is in Korea. But we have to have some eyes and some presence, because there are bad people out there, and there are people who intend to do harm, and they're going to take advantage of the niceness and the naivete of people. So what would you say is kind of missing from the conversation right now when it comes to talking about firearms, specifically border security? Like, we're pretty strict on guns in Canada, but we have a lot of gun crime. So is it more something we need to do on our side? Is it something the Americans need to do on their side? Or is there some aspect to both? Like, if you were in a conversation with your friends outside of doing, the formal channels, but it's like, what have you seen that you think, hey, they're missing the boat on these things?
And it's like, I got to be careful with, expressing my opinions about certain things, but I would say in general, having some sort of mandate, like across Canada, trace the firearms, the crime guns, that would be helpful in the way that it then takes the conversation away from the firearm and makes it a crime gun. You know what I mean? Like,
okay.
I think sometimes when we try and regulate a firearm, they're missing the point at times, because the people who follow the firearms laws and get their pals and get their pals, and then you make more restrictions against them, these are the people that are following the law anyway. Like, it's against the law to shoot somebody, but people still get shot, right? And so if I make a law that says, all right, Nate, you can't have a pistol anymore, or you can't do anything with that pistol, the only people that aren't going to do anything with that pistol are people that follow the laws anyway. So sometimes these laws sometimes are counterproductive, because the bad guys weren't following the law anyway.
Mm-hmm.
It's be more important to see, like, let's focus on the crime gun aspect of it, and that by doing that, now we're talking about the guns that were used in some sort of act that caused them to be seized and arrested by a police agency. Now, if you take that and you say, okay, then we got this ballistic imaging system that Edmonton has, Vancouver, and it's used across a lot of provinces. It's the Cybin, or IBIS, it's called in certain areas. We call it NIBIN in the United States. So now, like that shooting in, remember Edmonton at that hookah bar a couple of years ago?
Yep.
There was 70 shots fired, 7 people shot, 1 person killed.
Yep.
Three of those guns were Glocks, and 1 was a revolver from Germany. The 3 Glocks came back to a couple stores in Dallas, Texas. That was on Saturday night into Sunday. So they traced the guns on Sunday, found out they're from Dallas. Then on Monday, when they entered them into the Cybin system, they found out that those 3 guns were used in 5 shootings in Toronto. It's like a fingerprint for the firearm.
Yep.
So now those 3 guns are more important than the 15,000 protected custody guns you guys have. Because the protected custody guns, like you said, could be given back next week, but they still show up as a number. But that's an irrelevant number for us.
And the tracing will lead to a person. Again, at the end of the day, it's like, I can't hold the gun accountable.
Yeah.
And often my argument is like, well, the gun is just a tool. Like they can be used for a whole number of purposes. You want to go hunting, sport shooting, whatever. It's a tool. It's the person that picks it up and what their intent is when they decide to use it for something. So
just like a knife in Manitoba, the leading cause of death is like black-handled steak knives or something like that. It's like some crazy thing. But they're not going to, you would never say ban black-handled steak knives that are bought at Canadian Tire. You would target the person stabbing the person.
Yeah.
Same as the firearm. The firearm's just like a tool like anything else. It's of course a very deadly tool, but so is a pitchfork,
When we talk about like some of the restrictions on firearms, I find it, and this is just my opinion, not saying it's reflective of yours or anything. But I find it kind of a disingenuous argument where they ban, kind of like you were saying before, like they go after certain parts of the gun, or hey, I'm going to ban this type of thing, but not this thing. If they really just didn't want firearms here, they'd say, we no longer import firearms, and nobody's allowed to make firearms in Canada. Done. Like it wouldn't be that hard, or even ban the action type, right? You said no more semi-autos at all. Like that, there goes a whole bunch, but it's this like, well, your barrel can be 4.17 inches, but not 4.18 inches, and it's like, what are we doing here? And
I would say even more so is if you get caught committing a crime with a firearm, it should be a minimum sentence. Target that person, make it disincentivize that. So now if I got a gun in my waistband and I rob a store, it's 5 years in jail, just say. 5 years you get. If you get caught in these parameters, 5-year guarantee. I think people in Canada especially would go, wait a minute, it's nice to make $5,000 or $3,000, with a gun from the US. But if I get caught, I don't want to go to jail for 5 years. So maybe I would not do that. And I'm talking about not the hardcore criminals. But if you sit there with 250 guns and then you get 3 months in jail, you can ban anything you want. But if the risk reward balance is off, people are going to do it anyway, So just say there's 250 firearms homicides to 300 a year in Canada for 40 million people, which you'd say, oh my God, that's kind of low, right?
Yeah.
So now if you take out just say the normal, not normal, but just say the domestics of that, where it's brother on brother, father and son, husband and wife, that's almost 100 of them are that. So look at the rest of Canada's 200 homicides, just say at the top end of people getting killed with a firearm, during a hostile action. This is what I tell my Canadian colleagues all the time. If you only have, just say 200 homicides in your entire country, do those 200 right. You know what I mean? This ain't like Baltimore where you have 200 in a year and it's 500,000 people in the city, you guys got 40 million people, 200 homicides that you could actually investigate. Go put your efforts into that, because as much as Canada looks to the US and goes, oh, thank God, we only have 200 or 300, just say you guys have. And you look at us and the thousands that we have, the same way you guys look at us is the same way like England and Sweden and the European Union looks at Canada.
Yeah.
Because Canada is half the population of England, and England has like 70 firearms homicides. So they're like a quarter of what Canada is with double the population. So they look at you guys like you're the Wild West.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So, and then you guys look at us that way. But it's like, all right, if you only have 200 real homicides, not real, there's 300 about, but the domestic ones are usually not that investigatively challenging. You show up at a house and it's a guy shot his brother or something, there's nothing you could do to prevent that.
Yeah.
Other than just no guns. But if there was a gun there, he might have done it with a baseball bat or a black-headed steak knife or something like that. You know what I mean?
Well, and I get people go, okay, well, a knife, right? Like there's, they got to get up to you and do something to you. So it gives people a chance to get away. Okay, what about vehicles? We see people driving through Christmas markets and nobody's getting away from that. Like it's where there's a will, there's a way. People will find a tool to do something if they have to.
Whatever tool.
Yeah.
Is available.
And I think, just kind of speaking to your last points there, a lot of it obviously comes down to politics, like the numbers that they choose to put out there and with the context that they're stating things in. My biggest thing that I do through like the podcast and any of the social media is I always just encourage people to ask questions and start reading more. Like it's just go and look into these things, and you'll find a lot of this data is out there. Yeah. Or you just have to figure out which is the right person to ask. I was on a bit of a back and forth on LinkedIn today with someone just talking about the border crossings of people, and we won't get too into this topic. I'm just going to explain this, but it's we were just talking about like, well, how many of those crossings are people that were on like some terrorist list? Yeah, and then they go, well, how many of those are even people that, are on the list by accident because there's always mistakes or similar names and stuff. I'm like, well, I don't know. Yeah. Go ask the media. Tell the media you want them to ask better questions and you expect this of the politicians. And like, we all need to start doing a better job of this. So I think it's on all of us.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would say it's like, when you read what's on the media or you read what's on Facebook or LinkedIn, there's so much uninformed opinions, and there's so many people working under assumptions. It's when they used to say that 90% number, and I'm not trying to defend the United States here. It's just I'm talking facts. Mm-hmm. They used to say 90% of all the guns recovered in Canada come from the US, and I was like, wow, that's interesting. Like I would expect it to be a higher number, but they said, but if all you're tracing is Glocks, then you're only going to get the Glocks back, and the Glocks are coming from the U.S. But if you trace all the guns, then we're talking about like that. When you ask questions, like the Socratic method is lost on this generation or group of people that were just say why, like, all right, why is it only 2,000 this season? Well, it's actually not. It's just say close to 40,000. I was like, holy cow! Like I didn't realize that there were that many guns recovered in Canada. Then you say, but are all those crime guns? It's like, wait, no, they're not all crime guns. So now that 40,000 becomes 20,000. Yeah. So it's like, all right, well, we're tracing 10% of the guns. Let's push out tracing. Let's get these cops knowledgeable about tracing and the importance of it. Because the cool thing about tracing these, especially handguns in Canada, but all guns, because it gives you a better idea of what your problem is. Because you guys had no idea before that how much domestic trafficking was going on, horizontally across Canada as opposed to north-south. So now if you figure if 44% of these 13,000 are coming from the south to the north, you got the other 56% that's bouncing around horizontally across Canada. That was never known because they weren't tracing those guns. You know what I mean? It was like that gap was completely blind. You were blind to that before. Now you see it. Now you can go, okay, let's get the CFOs involved. Keep asking why and what can we do? And that's why Terry Bryant out in Alberta, she's amazing. You're CFO. And once you realize that there's a domestic issue, then you got to bring in domestic partners to help with the domestic trafficking. And that's where CFOs come in. And Saskatchewan and Alberta have this very aggressive and very, very, very knowledgeable CFO's office.
That is one of my biggest gripes in law enforcement up here. And it's just been the stats and the data. And like and right up till recently, like in the last few years, we haven't done a good job of keeping track of anything. It's like, and we borrow a lot of stats from the US. Like I'll go to training things for all types of training, and we'll have like, well, this FBI study said this, or DEA says this, ATF says this. And it's like, don't we have any of our own things to relate to? Like, does nobody track anything up here? So
That's funny because I used to see that as well. Like, how do we get these numbers? Like, where do we get these numbers? Like, no one seemed to have the numbers. It was so funny.
Yeah.
And, because like you said, we're very data heavy in the United States. It was like a black hole for me up here when I first got up here. I had to go on Google and search and search and search. And I finally found the Commission of Firearms reports. And they were all like from 2009 to 2019 at the time. And I was like, oh, all right, at least I found something that has some data. And then I found the data and I was like, wait a minute. The numbers are very static. So I had this conversation with the RCMP back in the day, probably 6 years ago now. I said, are you guys like, just say I have 10 socks in my drawer. And I say I have 10 socks. But I throw away 5 socks and I buy 5 more. And at the end of the year, I have 10 socks. The accounting system was a little haywire because I think the number was too static for a while. It was like 25,000 between 24.5 and 25.5 every year, fella. And you could pull them up online, these Commissioner of Firearms.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, how can it be that flat of a number? Like, any crime, any homicides, shootings, rape, break and entering. It's sometimes it's a wavy line. Like we've seen crime stats in the charts. This thing was flat, bro. It looked flat, and I was like, they counting the same things? Are they like getting rid of 10,000, putting 10,000 more in, and keeping it at 25,000? I was like, why is there no fluctuation? And then within a year, in 2020, I think was the last report. It went from 2019 to 2020. It went from 25,000 to 30,000. Then it went from 30 to 33,000. And then all of a sudden it's just not in the report anymore.
Yeah. It's funny. We report, here in Edmonton, we report on like the shooting statistics and different things. And, from month to month, I'll see the numbers and I'll give credit to gang suppression team, that I was on. I just got promoted out of there. So, we did a lot of good work there, and we had a very big impact straight from all the offenders, criminals, the bad guys' mouths. Like people actually moved out of town because of the stuff that we were doing. But it's just funny because like their numbers when they report shootings, that'll include like, well, some of these are targeted, some are not. And sometimes when the credit is taken for that, where it's like, well, we're doing a good job. It's like, actually, a lot of the bad guys were just on vacation this month. Like they're over in Dubai, so the numbers went down. Like, that's actually why it's down, at least in the targeted hit department.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's just sometimes the numbers. I'm like, stats are good for some things, but they're not in a lot of other respects. So
we used to see that at the in the States a lot of times. Like it'd be a cold snap where it gets like below 0 for a week.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no shootings. It's like, because nobody's outside, bro. Like, it's cold. Don't pat yourself on the back. You really go, oh man, we're doing a great job. There's less shootings in January. It's like, no, it's just too cold in Chicago, or it's just too cold in Seattle at times or a miserable storm front came through. It's like, all right, well, the amount of factors that influence the shootings and the homicides, they're so varied. And I don't think anybody has a real grasp of what influences that. It's socioeconomics. Sometimes there's a depression. Obviously with a big event like COVID, we saw a spike in firearms being smuggled to Canada because of lack of cross-border traffic caused a price increase of a Glock from 5,000 to 6,000 in Toronto to 8,000 to 10,000 because now the guns weren't making it through. So then now there's a huge cost increase for whatever Glocks are available. So then that's why in 2020, at the end of 2020, we saw a significant increase. And that was at the same time as that we started tracing more. We saw a significant increase in the amount of referrals that we sent. Like the year before, in 2019, we sent down, I think, 140 referrals. In 2020, we sent down 236 because those, remember, are 1 year or less. All of a sudden, COVID, the prices spiked, then people were trying to bring up more.
Yeah.
And then we were getting them and then tracing them and showing that they're less than a year, which sometimes, like I said, it was 6 days. It could be bought in Texas and then 6 days later it's recovered in Toronto. It's like, holy cow. I mean, that takes a lot of effort. And then, so, with the cross-border trafficking, you'll see that because it's based on politics and whether or not the border's open or closed, and you'll see a significant increase. But domestically, it's hard to tell. Was it weather? Were they all on vacation in Dubai? What was the cause of that decrease? I don't know. I really don't know. A lot of agencies or politicians will take credit for this stuff sometimes, and it's what they do. It's a natural thing for politicians to want to take credit for things. But we, as cops, know that sometimes it's the weather, sometimes it's the tsunami, sometimes it's the guys are on vacation in Dubai, like you said.
Just kind of as we're getting to the end of our time, one of the last things I just wanted to get your thoughts on was these 3D printed firearms now, because just looking at kind of the trends in that, and we've seen homemade firearms, like you machine a Mag 10 out of a block of metal.
Franken-guns. Yeah, Franken-guns, they call them out west.
With the 3D printing, it's like, I don't know how much longer we'll need the U.S. to be the source of our this problem or our own problems. So what are we seeing? Like, are people smuggling those as well? Or is it just more like you're buying a 3D printer in Canada and here you go, buy the plastics or whatever material they're using and that's it. We don't need to kind of bring anything up.
Yeah, there was a spike in 2022. It's decreased since then. Out of the Sûreté de Quebec, the SQ or QPP as it's called sometimes in English, they did a project in June of 22 that was Project Reproduction. So, they sent out warrants, they leads to 9 provinces, I think it was. I think the only one missing was PEI. And they wound up on one day in June of 22, they recovered like 400 3D printed parts and accessories and firearms, right? Mm-hmm. But since then, it's actually decreased since then. And, when you get those spikes like that, all of a sudden you'll see 2022 and then 2023 is like a normal amount like you had in 2021.
Okay.
You see this artificial increase based on one project that Quebec was doing, but we've seen the numbers continuously drop, and I think it's lack of availability. Like a lot of people think the 3D printed guns are I can print it and grab it and shoot. No, you need metal rails, you need the barrel, you need specific things to finish it. And since Canada has restricted the imports of those, that you're not seeing them being made, because just say you're a big gangster in Toronto. You don't want to be walking around with a little 3D printed gun that looks like a coffee cup. It's an image thing. These bad guys have their egos as well, and they don't want to be seen with a non-Glock. Glock is like a status symbol up here to criminals. And if you're a real criminal, you're buying a real Glock. You're not getting a 3D printed gun. You'll see them out in the prairies a lot more than you'd see them in Toronto. And just like you'll see a lot more Franken guns, they call them. They make, guns out of bicycle parts sometimes, and out of like 2x4s and zip guns and stuff like that out west, where you'll never see that in Toronto or Vancouver, So, the 3D printed problem in Canada, I'd say when you look at overall picture, it's an emerging problem, but it's not a big problem. You know what I mean? Okay. It's like first ones we saw up here were in 2019 in Quebec, and like all new crime trends in Canada, it starts in Quebec. For some reason, I have no idea why. Moves west, and then makes it out to BC eventually, and then hops over to the Maritimes. And it's just like this stuff we're doing. I was talking to the guys from Newfoundland yesterday. They're like, hey, we're starting to see these 3D printed guns. I was like, you guys are always like 6 years behind. It starts in Quebec, rolls that way, because in 2019, when I first got up, 3D printed guns were a big thing in Quebec. It was like the recoveries were in Quebec. Then it rolled westbound, and then Manitoba and everybody. And then right now we're dealing with 3D printed recovery in Newfoundland. But if you look at the total numbers of firearms, it's a minimal amount of overall guns seized in Canada right now.
Yeah, that's an interesting trend that you're talking about there. Because if you think about it, like, well, where's the money? I would imagine this is like, where's the money? Where's the concentration of organized crime? And we'll see that kind of like maybe Montreal, Toronto, Vancouver, right? The bigger cities.
Yeah, 100%.
So yeah, if it comes up, if it came up to Vancouver, the next place you're going to see it probably in Ontario or Quebec.
Yeah.
And then it'll trickle maybe back west into the prairies and then out to the East Coast. Like
it's so interesting. Why it works that way? It's probably like you said, it's some organized crime groups or, outlaw motorcycle gangs, possibly, the concentrations in Montreal, Toronto. I'd say Montreal and Vancouver are the two biggest ones for that kind of activity.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably why it generally starts in Montreal and then makes its way into the rest of the country. Somehow, some way, that seems to be the trend with a lot of different stuff, whether it's the type of dope being used. It generally starts in Montreal. I don't know why that is. And it maybe have to do with organized crime and the cartels. I have no idea. But like, it somehow insulates itself from New Brunswick, which is right next to Quebec, for 5 years. It goes through the rest of Canada and then back out to the Maritimes. It's such an interesting trend pattern for a lot of the crimes that we're looking at up here. And but the 3D printed guns, I'd say in general, is going to be a limited problem in scope. Like in the US, we have that same problem, and the trends are generally similar. They track the same. But we've seen a reduction in 3D printed recoveries in 2024 compared to 2023.
Okay.
I don't know. And it's like the US, like these guys, if you could buy a Glock for $500 in Arizona or Florida, why are you going to spend 10 grand on a machine like to print one out? You could just buy one and then sell it up in New York or sell it in one of these restricted states.
Yeah.
So
at least until printers get cheaper, or the technology was fairly new, and then once it gets more out there, then maybe we'll see high quality $200 printers or something. But
they have them, and they do have low cost ones. And now, just say you want to print a gun, all right, you print it. It takes, on a high quality one, it'll take 2 hours. On a crappier one, it'll take 16 hours, sometimes 24 hours to print. But the problem is, like, there's so much more involved after that. You got to file it down. You got to drill holes out of it. You got to find the rail kits. You got to get the barrel. You got to get all this other stuff. So it's, that the perspective of the perception of what 3D printed is like, oh, I could hit the button, it prints, I pick it up, and I can whack somebody with it. It's not at all the case. You know what I mean?
It's like, if you're going to put that much effort into doing this in the first place, why didn't you just get a normal job?
Some of these bad guys are so creative. It's like you could have cured cancer if you focused your energies on something more positive than being a criminal. They're very creative. But it's like, also, it's like, Jesus, man, like you're very ingenious, but like just do something good with it instead of bad. Like I said, they curing cancer or something.
You know what? We're just coming up to the end of our time. That hour flew by. I want to say thanks for coming on the show. I have to get you back on here because it's always a blast talking with you. Great. Thank you for being on the show today, and hang on the line for a couple seconds.
Yep.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for listening in and following along with the discussions. Be sure to click the follow or subscribe button on your respective listening platform. Also, check out the Quiet Professional on X and Instagram under TQP780. And most importantly, please share where you can. Everyone has a part to play in getting these education and information pieces out there, so pass it along. Thanks again.